One important writing skill is to learn what redundancy is, and similarly, how to avoid being too wordy in our writing. So today we're going to talk about what it means to be redundant, and also the importance of being concise, especially in certain types or genres of writing. Being concise is saying something the short way. It's an adjective meaning marked by brevity of expression or statement, free from all elaboration and superfluous detail. And that fancy definition just means that concise writing is to the point. It's the shortest possible way of saying something. It's particularly valued in business, journalism, and quite a lot of adult job fields. When we're being concise, there's very little description, and we're usually writing an active voice as opposed to passive voice. For example, a really wordy sentence might be, "The super cute puppy ran really quickly through the neighbor's backyard." A more concise version might be, "The puppy ran through a backyard," or even more concise, "The puppy ran." Now, there's technically nothing wrong with this first sentence, but it depends on the situation you're writing in and whether or not your audience wants you to be concise. A concise audience will not want all this extra descriptive stuff. They will not want the extra adjectives like super cute, and they may not want the adverbs like really quickly. Maybe all I want to hear is the puppy ran. But another problem with wordiness, or being too wordy, is redundancy, or being redundant, which is another adjective for when you repeat something else in an unnecessary way. Redundant writing is a bad kind of repetitive. Now, sometimes we will be intentionally repetitive, like in parallelism or parallel structure, which is where we might repeat exact words or phrases on purpose for a stylistic effect. And that's an okay thing. That's a good thing, especially in speech writing. For example, if you think of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech, in that case, he purposely repeated the phrase "I have a dream," and it was a good thing and it worked. But we're talking about the bad kind of repetitive writing. We're talking about redundancy. Sometimes redundancy is the obvious use of synonyms in the same sentence, but it can also be more subtle. Here's a quick example down here. It would be redundant to say, over the last 50 years, the Beatles have spent 5 decades making great music. Well, you could just cut this first phrase because we already said 5 decades. 5 decades and 50 years are the same thing. We don't need to say that twice. So I would just cut it, and then the rest of the sentence would be fine. And by the way, redundancy is hated by standardized tests, businesses, and pretty much most of the nonfiction world. So even if you're in a writing scenario where they don't mind description, don't be redundant. Here are a few more examples of sentences that are either too wordy or too redundant. For example, I don't want to say in my piece of writing, "She was shy and bashful," because bashful is the same thing as shy. It's just a synonym. If I were to say, "She was shy and mysterious," shy and mysterious are two different adjectives. Those can both stay because they're not redundant synonyms of each other. I could say number 2, drivers are warned to take every precaution while operating a motor vehicle. That might be more formal, but it's also more wordy when I could just say, "Driver should be careful," and I could get to the point better. Here's another redundancy issue. In this school, we will not tolerate disrespect in school. This is a more obvious redundancy issue because the same words are getting repeated. Number 4, he found his neighbor who lived next door to be very nice. This is considered redundant because, hey, by definition, a neighbor might live next door, so I really don't need both. I can pick one and cut the other. Redundancy doesn't just apply to sentences, though. Simple words or phrases might be considered redundant. For example, a plan by nature is just a plan. It may or may not be set in stone, and it may or may not be agreed on. So in some business scenarios, they think the term proposed plan is redundant because a plan is just something that's been proposed. And here's another common mistake in number 6. Every year, he runs in the annual hot chocolate 5K. Well, every year and annual are the same thing. You don't need it twice. Thank you for listening, and if you need to hear more about this topic, you can always rewind the video.